function to just toss in where people, what background they have. That might be helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Brad.
And I'm back.
Yay, Steve, where are you? I gotta find you. There you are. Yes.
There I am.
I introduced you, but you weren't here.
I'm very sorry. Linda warned me if we try something new, we'd screw up the technology, and she was 100% right. So I totally
Yeah.
screwed us up. We all
Late
came
last
in
night,
as
he had
Linda's
this
donkey
idea.
piece and
Late last
whatever.
night was an idea, and I said, don't try something new, Steve. It won't work. Anyway,
Anyway,
we're good.
so am I on?
You are. You
Okay,
are
great. Well,
spotlighted.
welcome everybody. We're thrilled to have everybody here again. Sorry for the screw up. We're still learning this technology despite being at it for a year, but they keep doing new stuff and we want to make it better. And what do you do? In any case, so my job right now is quickly to just give you an overview. What we've learned in these events is that it's a mistake to assume everybody knows what a community foundation is, no matter how long you've been in finance or in the space. A lot of folks really aren't really clear on what the concept is. So let me just quickly tell you that community foundations are nonprofit organizations. Were established to serve a specific geographic region. And our purpose is to focus the philanthropy of local residents on the challenges and opportunities in that region. We obviously cover the 33 towns and cities in north central Massachusetts. That covers from Littleton on the east all the way out to Irving and Wendell, Orange and Athol on the western part of our district, up to the New Hampshire border and down just above Worcester and what have you. So that's our region. There are 16 community foundations around Massachusetts. I think over 200, Brad will tell me the right number, around the country. And we serve these geographic regions and help people focus their philanthropy on the community needs. So the other thing about community foundations is we offer a whole variety of philanthropic options. You know, we can set up a scholarship for your alma mater. You can create a donor advised fund or an endowment. There are a lot of tax benefits associated with community foundations, just like any kind of nonprofit donation vehicle. But we also offer, what's interesting about community foundations is we offer personalized service. We generally be able to talk to you one-on-one in most cases, in our case, certainly. And then there's also the local knowledge of the region that helps your clients who want to have an impact in that region be more impactful, because the folks at the community foundation, wherever they are, really know the nonprofits and the challenges and the opportunities to really help guide philanthropy. So that's what makes community foundations kind of unique in the philanthropic space. More recently, community foundations are being seen by larger foundations and others as a vehicle for making impact happen at the local level. This was happening before the pandemic, but since the COVID, it's been supercharged. Here, I'll give you an example. Our community foundation, we have endowed funds that we have discretion over. So our board of directors makes grants every year, and we grant about $500,000 a year in our local grant making. During COVID, because of resources been directed to us, we've given out over $2 million in grants over the last 10 months to organizations across north central Massachusetts to deal with a whole host of problems that people are facing during the crisis, including providing food support for people, financial support so they can stay in their homes and their apartments, PPE for frontline workers, homeless services, mental health services, access to education. People have looked to community foundations as this vehicle to get impact emergency funding on the ground quickly. So that's really been an evolving role for community foundations, and it reflects how nimble we are and how well we understand our local region so that we can support a whole range of philanthropic needs and interests that people want to focus in on their region. We also, obviously, when people set up funds with us, they can distribute to any place in the country or the world that's legal. But our mission is really to focus our philanthropic effort to our region. So that's sort of the shorthand on community foundations. And what I'd like to do next, I know Ryan, you are already in there. Did you have a chance to chat about the Professional Advisor Network?
I'm not sure that Ryan is here.
Oh, Mr. Ryan. Oh, sorry. Well, great. So not great, obviously. I'll just tell you that Ryan McQuain, who is the chair of our Professional Advisor Committee, has been doing a wonderful work with Linda and all of us over the years to help connect all of you to the community foundation so you can better understand the options to offer your clients. So if Ryan isn't here, what we'll do is make up the time that we lost with my technology glitch and move right into our panel. Does that make sense, Linda? So if you're going to, if you highlight our folks, I will start introducing our panel. All right, great. So right to the business at hand. We are really delighted to have three people who have deep knowledge and expertise in this topic we're talking about today, how to help your clients think about their philanthropic options. What I'll do is I'm going to give a short description of each of our guests, and then I'm going to launch right into questions and we'll get the conversation going. And as I'm sure Linda told you, our hope is that we'll engage all of you in questions, the panelists for each other, and all of you out in the cyber space, whatever we're calling this. And you can raise your hands, or you can, I think you folks probably figured that out by now. Let us know if you have questions, or you can put them in the chat. If you're a little shy and just want Linda to convey the question, you can do that as well. But let's get underway. And Linda probably also told you we will finish at a hard 10 o'clock. So let's move on. So first, Julie Rubenstein. Julie, thank you so much for being here. Julie is a philanthropic advisor and vice president at the Philanthropy Center at JP Morgan in New York City. The center advises individuals and families to help them meet their philanthropic goals. Julie's been involved with philanthropy for over 10 years, and we're just really thrilled to have her bring her expertise to this conversation. Thanks, Julie. Ben Howard is Business Development Director at Bemis Associates, a global adhesive company here in North Central Mass. We're so thrilled to have them in the region. Bemis is doing some very cool things with adhesives that's really revolutionizing the apparel industry and electronics and other sectors. So it's really exciting to have the company here. He's not Sheena Maya, however, he is Ben Howard. But Sheena Maya does reflect his passionate outdoor enthusiasm. So we'll get that fixed eventually. Ben plays an active role in his family's philanthropy. So the Howard family operates a donor-advised fund through the Community Foundation of North Central Mass, and they're currently focusing their efforts on youth climate change and education programs and organizations. So we'll get back into more of Ben's work in a moment. And finally, Brad Ward. Brad, thanks so much for being here from the Council on Foundations. Brad's the lead strategist for community philanthropy at the Council on Foundations in Washington. The Council on Foundations is a membership organization of hundreds, if not thousands, of philanthropies around the country. Brad works with community foundations and place-based institutions across the US and North America, and he helps them find and share best practices in community philanthropy. Before his work at the Council on Philanthropy, Brad was the CEO of his own community foundation in Indiana, Go Hoosiers. And equally important to his success, I'm sure, is that he started his career in his teens launching a successful DJ business. So we're delighted to have Brad and Julie and Ben with us today. And I'm just going to launch right into the conversation, if we could. Ben, I'm going to start with you. So Ben, now you see that he is Ben Howard, not Sheena Hea. Ben, why don't you tell us something about the process that your family pursued to come to the decision to establish the Howard Family Foundation Fund for the Community Foundation?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Steve. And yes, I'm Ben Howard, not Sheena Maya. Nice to be here. Appreciate the intro, Steve and Linda. In terms of the Howard family establishing a foundation or establishing a donor advised fund through the Community Foundation, I've got to give a lot of credit to my mom and dad. They were the ones that kicked off the conversation and brought up the opportunity about wanting to get a lot more into philanthropy. With that said, they quickly passed the torch on to the kids and let myself and my siblings lead the charge, lead the show, so to speak. And as we got into that, we started to explore what are different vehicles and quickly came up with the donor advised fund through the Community Foundation through a couple of recommendations. But really in terms of the simplicity of operating a donor advised fund, establishing it, and then being able to provide grants through that, it's really easy. So it made it it made it lightweight lifting for us. So that was a big one. The other one, Steve, what you mentioned when you kicked off, the Community Foundation really knows the nonprofit space in the local and regional community. And that was a new area for us. So getting the support from Linda and the team in terms of helping us direct our grants or connect with nonprofits, that was another big reason in terms of why we picked working with the Community Foundation. And then the third, really just simple economics in terms of if we were going to start the economics cost, it's going to be more to do. So yeah, quickly became a pretty going with the donor advised fund through the Community Foundation.
Great. Great. That's great. Thanks so much. And I just want to just remind folks, especially our panelists, that, don't be shy to just weigh in on anything that one of your colleagues brings up if you want to elucidate. But I will, I do have questions I want to get to. But again, don't be shy. Ben, thanks very much. So Julie, maybe we should sort of step back a little bit and take a little, help the professional advisors on the call get a better handle on this. Can you give us an overview of sort of the charitable vehicles that might be available to individuals and families? And the other thing I would think about is, are you seeing any trends in how people are entering philanthropy?
Yes, sure. Happy to tackle that one. And, I've been on many a Zoom call. I've never seen one person overtake so many, profiles. So it's really impressive, whoever Sheena is. But from where I sit in the Philanthropy Center, we are completely vehicle and cause agnostic. So we're really there to kind of lay out the facts and help people reach a decision. But just to take a step back, and this is probably, not new to many of you, but just to give a little bit of the brief overview, private foundations are tax-exempt entities that make donations to qualified charities. They're more of a formal legal structure. They require an attorney to, draft governing documents and file for exempt status with the IRS. There are reporting and regulatory requirements annually, and a requirement to distribute 5% of your assets to charity every year. So those are just some of the high-level characteristics of private foundations. With donor advised funds, you're able to accomplish many of the things that foundations can accomplish, but with fewer sort of, administrative requirements. So donor advised funds are, sponsored by a public charity that administers the program, and there's no minimum distribution requirement annually. There are no administrative requirements for the donor or the family that has established the donor advised fund. And, I think there's sort of different tax deductibility considerations to take into account, typically with donor advised funds, depending on the type of asset you're contributing. The donor advised fund is typically more favorable in terms of tax deductibility. So those are, high level kind of differences. I almost think about the private foundation as more of a formal legal structure, and a donor advised fund is almost more of a charitable savings account, although technically that's not what it is. And when we work with clients around how to kind of identify the right vehicle for them based on their needs, we talk through a couple key considerations. And I'd say the first is really privacy. And this is increasingly top of mind for families and individuals, I think, just given the current atmosphere and whatnot. So, with private foundations, there is an annual filing requirement. Anyone can go on to GuideStar and pull the annual tax return and see the size of the foundation, the grants that have been made, who sits on the board. Whereas with donor advised funds, there's the option to make an anonymous grant. So, that is one key, I'd say, sort of sticking point for people and key consideration. We talked about the administrative requirements, but I think, given what Ben shared, that's a really, big factor in making decisions about the right vehicle. Private foundations have a number of rules and regulations to keep in mind, and a lot of people would like the sort of ease of administration that a donor advised fund provides. Control is another big one. So in terms of control, a private foundation does allow sort of more your intent to be codified in a real way to maybe define a narrow mission and a process for governance and succession into the future. So typically people who don't want much mission drift might veer towards a private foundation. Although we certainly see a best practice in philanthropy over generations in really allowing for some flexibility. So that's another key thing. And then, we talked a little bit about tax deductibility and distribution requirements as well. So those are some of the key factors. One other thing I'll mention that we're also seeing is that private foundations do allow you to employ staff, which is another, for some of the larger families we work with, another key consideration. In terms of trends, and I'll be quick, I think what we're seeing is, undeniably a growth in donor advised funds. Their ease of administration, anonymity are the key, I'd say, points there. But we're also seeing people actually use these vehicles, together. So I think donor advised funds are increasingly being used as a complement to private foundations and also as a training tool for the next generation in getting their feet wet in philanthropy and sort of getting started without revealing, maybe the overall balance sheet of the family, if there's a concern there. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully gives a good sort of overview of the key differences and some of the key considerations.
That was perfect. That was perfect. Sue, are you raising your hand or are you just adjusting your camera there? Okay. Great. Any questions? If not, I'm going to launch into, well, I'm going to do mine first since I'm in charge. Brad, so this is a great kickoff. I think Julie's discussion really enters right to the question I wanted to ask you. If you think about, as advisors think about these different vehicles, how should they think about community foundations versus private foundations? Is this a rivalry? Is this one or the other? How do these organizations interact? How should the advisors be thinking about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I thought it was impressive that you dug up that I was a DJ, however long ago that was. So someone's doing their research. That's impressive. Start there. But I don't even know if you need me. I think with Julie in the house and Ben, we've got all the answers that you need. But I am delighted to be here, and thanks for sharing. It was nice to see the different types of backgrounds that we have in the room. The question that you asked about the difference between private foundations and donor advised funds or just working with community foundations is, and it's important to know that community foundations have a whole lot more to offer than just donor advised funds. They've got a lot of really awesome tools that can help create legacies for folks, whether it be legacies for families, individuals, businesses, corporations, you name it. They can really go a lot deeper in how they impact the local community. And I think that is inexplicably the value of a community foundation is it's hyper local. It's all about the community in which many people are creating their wealth. And so it creates the cyclical opportunity to give back to the place that gave to them. And I think the other interesting thing about a community foundation that's really important to remember is when you think about all the local touch points that you have, and you think about growing up, and many of us played Little League, we went to church, we went to public schools or Catholic schools or some parochial school, or we were in Girl Scouts, and then we got married, we had kids in the local hospital, and they started doing Little League and soccer leagues and so on and so forth. And we see Rotaries and Optimists. We start to see just how many different charitable touch points there are in our local community, sometimes without even acknowledging just the type of influence that it has on us as we grow up, as we raise children, so on and so forth. And as we change from one portion of being a child to being an adult to being someone who's retiring in a community. And so that is sort of where the community foundation sits in the middle of all of that, because their intent is to try to connect multiple generations of people and multiple generations of charitable impact. And I find that to be pretty rewarding. Unlike Julie, I'm totally biased, and I work with plenty of private foundations, and God love them. But I'm really a favorite is my community foundations and the work that they do at a local level. And donor advised funds are definitely a cool vehicle because they create sort of a more holistic investment, more holistic engagement in the process. But I just think that there's so many different types of funds that the Community Foundation can offer that really give professional advisors probably one of the greatest assets that they can have, which is an unbiased vehicle for advice and counsel. And what I mean by that is that if a donor or a client is talking to you about trying, maybe they have an appreciated stock or a closely held stock or highly appreciated securities or something like that that they need to relinquish for tax purposes, whatever the cause may be. They hit some type of an inheritance or unwinding a family business. If those types of things are started, it's usually triggering them to think about what they want to do and in terms of how to minimize their tax liability, how to do something good for the community, and how to take care of their children appropriately. And so I think this is where, as an advisor, you can use the Community Foundation to think strategically about the vehicles. To Julie's point, you can think strategically about when does a private foundation make more sense? When does the Community Foundation add value? And sometimes, how do you utilize both of those vehicles effectively? That's where the Community Foundation is. And then just advising on how to give back in an effective and efficient way. If you call your buddy who serves on the church committee, he's going to tell you one answer: you should give to the church. Or you call your other friend who seems to be good at this and happens to be on the board of the local historical society. Susan's going to say, well, you should give it to the historical society, and that's probably okay. But the value of the Community Foundation is they can look holistically at the community and say what really aligns with what the interests are of the client, and what are the ways in which that donor or that business or that individual could really think in ways that create impact in ways that are unique. Ben, you probably have siblings and you probably all don't agree on, the same charities, right? there's days where you have competing interests. And so the Community Foundation can kind of be that go-between to help provide lots of different advice.
Yeah, Brad, that brings up a good point. And one thing that you mentioned that really struck a chord is the Community Foundation is such an expert on some of the challenges and issues in the specific community. When we were making the decision to go through a Community Foundation and donor advised fund, that was both a positive and a little bit of a concern because we were interested in also going a little bit wider. We had a big mission, but also some narrowness to that we wanted to identify some partners that were a little bit bigger and wider outside of the community. So it was great in the sense of this Community Foundation can help in terms of the really local narrow scope or the community issues, and we were able to support that. But the donor advised fund also allowed us to support some of the other issues, not necessarily directly within the community. So confirming that with the Community Foundation was definitely a big reason that we still decided to go with that option.
And that makes me think, Steve, you commented about the number of community foundations out there. The beauty there is that if Ben all of a sudden has a family member that up and moves to Oregon, the Central Massachusetts Community Foundation does not need to be an expert on all things Oregon. It can then call upon its colleagues over at the Benton Community Foundation or the Oregon Community Foundation or the Gorge Community Foundation and say, hey, we've got this family member that's interested in doing X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden you're starting to create that intricacy of support and networking that happens. And, Steve made the comment, the council is there as well. We often are a conduit. Sometimes you want to make global grants. You see disaster happen, or you just have an affinity to somewhere else. And making international grants is not an easy endeavor, but it absolutely can be done. And usually there's the expertise within the Community Foundation network to try to provide that advice, sometimes at no additional cost, because there's the value of the network. And where there are costs, they usually could be maximized because there's multiple players involved.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in there on the Community Foundation piece, because I know I was talking at a higher level about some general vehicles. We've seen an increase, and again, I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone, in families looking for sort of ideas around their philanthropy. How do they identify nonprofit organizations and identify ones that are really effective and especially in light of COVID, very responsive and close to the communities that they serve. So of course, to Steve's point, community foundations have been a staple of communities for much longer, prior to COVID-19. But I think it just highlights the importance of their role in identifying local community needs, if that's a focus for donors, and being responsive, and also in bringing sort of ideas to families. There's really an increased focus on not only due diligencing and finding effective organizations, but understanding impact. And obviously that can be easier to do when your giving is a little bit closer to home, and to have a resource like a community foundation to kind of provide that insight to you with that knowledge of the community is something that we're seeing a lot of people kind of lean into.
Steve, if I could add, Julie kind of triggered a good thought in my head, for the attorneys that are in the room, and I know there were a couple of them, I tend to, I think we think of estate planning and wills as very straightforward, and to a lot of degree they are, but this is where the partnership tends to be most fulfilling, is when attorneys are attuned to community philanthropy, they're attuned to community foundations, they start to think in terms of an ethical will. They start to think about, well, how do I help my client really translate what is valuable to them, and what their values are, their principles are, and what made them who they are. And sometimes that can be articulated in the will, and it can be associated with the type of giving that they choose to do. And then, for the accountants in the room, I don't know any donor that makes a big contribution or a significant allocation to charity without having talked to the attorney or the accountants first in terms of the tax liability. And then sooner or later, they all come together. And then for our investment advisors, I tend to think of investment advisors as the ones who are most attuned to how do we get the biggest bang for the buck in creating a charitable gift. So we create efficiency, we create effectiveness, and still without maybe negatively affecting the lifetime aspirations of the client for where they're trying to go with wealth creation and wealth maturity, because they can see the opportunities to use retirement funds in unique ways. They can see appreciated stocks being used in certain ways. And for all three of them, anything to do with real estate, there's some serious opportunities there. And anytime you're looking at charitable remainder trusts or things like that, it requires all those folks to be at the table. And the community foundation is usually just one of the people at the table, but it's not the first. I mean, they're usually three or fourth down the line. I made the joke when I was meeting with Ben and Julie the first time. I mean, I don't know many people that just walk around saying, you know what, I'm ready to give away my money. Like, where do I turn first? Like, that's usually not the trigger that people, launches them into philanthropy. Certainly, we all walk around with a deep appreciation for what we value and wanting to give back. There's just a real intrinsic value there that can't be spoken of. But we typically are working with some strong professionals to get there.
So Ben, thinking about the process you and your family went through, are there things, so we're talking to financial advisors, legal advisors, professional advisors here, are there kinds of information or legal or financial or other advice that you folks found especially useful, or you had a challenge finding that would help advise our audience?
Yeah, you know what, it's hard for me not to bring back to the point that Julie made about what are some of the administrative tasks and responsibilities in regards to setting up a private foundation versus going to a enterprise fund. And absolutely, the ease of getting started through a donor advised fund was so attractive to us. I think if we had gone down the route of private foundation, we would have been a lot more intimidated. There's much bigger hurdles to get going, where with the donor advised fund, it was really quick. We got to start doing the fun stuff. We got to start connecting with the nonprofits. We got to start learning and researching the causes. What are some of the root causes of these challenges, and how can we start supporting them? So to Julie's point, it really dip our toes in and explore the issues and what we were passionate about a lot more quickly. And I really think if we had gone a different route, it just would have been a longer lead time before we were able to make an impact. And some of us maybe even gotten tired before we really got to get started. So if your clients, I mean, looking to get involved in philanthropy, I can't personally recommend donor advised funds enough because of their ease and just the lead time to making an impact and getting involved. So for us, that was absolutely the biggest factor and I think the biggest impact.
That's great. So Julie, one of the things I'm thinking about is, again, stepping back, and one of the questions that I always wonder about is how the conversation with a client goes from finance to philanthropy. And Brad touched on it a little bit, but could you talk a little bit about how that sort of transitional, as Brad said, people don't show up and say, "Yeah, I want to give away my money."
Mhm.
Can you tell a little about how that conversation goes? Because a lot of financial advisors aren't necessarily philanthropy advisors, and they're being asked to be that more and more frequently. So can you give us a sense of how that conversation sort of transitions?
Sure. And, of course, that'll depend on the nature of your role. But we know that this is, philanthropy is something that people want to be talking about. I think there was I think it was a US Trust survey that said about 71% of high net worth individuals want to be talking about philanthropy. They rate it as very important in having conversations with their advisors. So I think the first thing, and I'm brought in by the advisors at JP Morgan, but we talk a lot about how do you keep philanthropy top of mind and sort of engage in these conversations. And it's really, I think, first about listening. So, listening for things like, I'm thinking about making a gift to my local food bank or my children's school. I've made more money than I know what to do with. How have other people approached getting started, or what have other people done? And an increasingly, relevant one, I think, in recent times, not to bring up COVID again, but many people have come to us and said, COVID-19 has caused so much devastation. How can I help? So listening for those kind of key questions that can open up a conversation is one thing. I think second, what's the context of the interaction with the client? Is there some sort of inflection point? That's often when philanthropy is raised or can be raised. So is there a liquidity event, some sort of wealth transfer within the family, or any sort of even decision-making kind of transfer? I think philanthropy is increasingly being brought up in the context of just, talking about wealth within a family and values transfer to future generations. And then, the last thing I'll mention is, of course, certain times of year are, make it more relevant to sort of raise the topic of philanthropy and ask questions like, have you thought about donating appreciated securities? Even things like, do you have an existing giving vehicle? If there is a private foundation, have you satisfied your 5% distribution requirement? We know a lot of donor advised funds are set up at year end if people haven't been able to satisfy that 5% distribution. And there's some debate about that, going on in the IRS and the Treasury. But as of now, that is a sort of solution that a lot of people use at year end if they haven't been able to thoughtfully distribute those required assets. And then, I think it's really, listening, thinking about the client situation. And also, I've noticed, and I imagine others can speak to this too, everyone wants to know what their peers are doing. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of prudent to raise conversations that you're having with other clients. So we often talk about, here's what we're seeing with other families. This has been top of mind for them. Is this something that you'd like to talk about? And one example of that quickly is just this idea of formalizing a charitable giving vehicle, either establishing or refining one in light of COVID. So we saw a lot of people really revisiting estate plans and recognizing, okay, I either need to set up an entity, I want to think about my philanthropic legacy, or if I have one. There was a family I worked with a donor advised fund at a community foundation, and they said, okay, we really need to start talking to our kids about why philanthropy is important for us and actually thinking through a succession plan for our donor advised fund. And they ultimately decided to have it be split upon their passing so that each child can then become donor advisors to their own fund. And it was COVID that really raised that sort of question for them, and got them to focus on it. So talking to people about what their peers are thinking about and best practices that you've seen is another way to kind of raise that conversation.
Brad, do you have any sense of how that works too, from your experience?
I'm not sure. Can you reframe? What's the?
We're really trying to get a sense of how the conversation goes from sort of financial management to philanthropy.
Yeah, I thought Julie did a pretty darn good job, but I don't know what else would really be in there. I mean, she talked about the life events that occur that usually trigger it. I was kind of, she got me thinking about one specific area of interest, which is maybe acknowledging the limitations of donor advised funds. Let's see if I can make Julie proud here on being non-community foundation biased. But I think knowing what your clients ultimately want to achieve is really important. And we have some really cool resources that I think they're a little bit older, but if Linda doesn't already have them, we could get them that really do a comparison of private foundations and donor advised funds. And donor advised funds, to Ben's point, I mean, when I saw that checklist of what a private foundation needs to go through to get its, even I was already turned off with the idea, because there's just layer after layer, but there is value in it when control is of the essence. And once you make a gift to the community foundation to establish donor advised fund, you've relinquished control. You've achieved that tax deduction immediately, and the donor doesn't have the same types of control it does with a private foundation. It can't hire staff for its own purposes. It can't have expenditures that it gets reimbursed through the private foundation, or like it can with a private foundation. So I think it is important, and those are the understanding the limitations. I tend to think of as a private foundation as it is. It's its own independent entity. And with a donor advised fund, you're ultimately gifting to the community foundation, but you are asking for opportunities to deeply and respectfully engage in the process. And that's what it ultimately is you're making recommendations to how to do grants and so forth. So Linda's going to share those documents, but I like to just be clear about those differences that people do need to be mindful of. And a lot of the different tools that a community foundation offer is totally based on the level of engagement that a donor wants to have. How involved do they want to be? It's easy for a donor, if the donor really knows their passions and their interests, sometimes they can give the community foundation the flexibility to do that independently. And they can just make an outright gift, and they can set up field of interest funds that benefit, the arts or environment or education that goes local. A donor advised fund is really a vehicle about helping to stay engaged with recommendations, and it's for that lifetime of giving. And to Julie's point, sometimes the next generation getting involved.
Yeah, I think just to emphasize one point, it's starting with understanding the goals that the family or individual have, and then the vehicle can kind of come after that.
So Ben, to that point, when you sit down and when the family thought about this issue, and again, it kind of combines with what Brad's talking about, your family's thoughts about philanthropy and how they want it will evolve over time. Has that already happened? Do you have a feeling about the way you guys are approaching this might be evolving, and does it affect the way you think about the vehicles you use for your philanthropy?
Yeah, great question. Right when we kicked it off, we did really get down as a family, explore what each of us as family members were really passionate about, and attempt to align on a shared mission. That's why the mission kind of has two things melded together. And Brad, to your point, the siblings don't always agree on what's most important, but it's right. We've been able to get general alignment on about what we support. And just some of the comments that you all made during this conversation triggered how it can evolve. So if those missions or passions change over time? What vehicles provide the most flexibility and the opportunity of setting up multiple donor advised funds as a way to allow siblings or donors to kind of work on their own separate paths as one? So Steve, I guess back to your question, it's evolved in the sense of actually we found more organizations in the community specifically that really aligned with our mission, where at first we started at a bit of a more regional scale, but then we realized, you know what, the involvement aspect of participating, volunteering, actually getting involved with some of those nonprofits in the community, one, has the same impact that we were trying to achieve already, but it's allowing us to get much more benefit out of it because of our own participation. So the Community Foundation has definitely helped foster that.
Great, thanks, Rich. I wanted to get, I've been sort of taking over the environment here. We have all of our folks in the audience. Anybody have any questions they want to present to our panel out there in the cyber world? Okay, Liz.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for this program, which I'm really enjoying. I'm an attorney. My clients are all in the nonprofit sector. The discussion about choice of entity and vehicle for philanthropy is always a threshold conversation we have with founders. And my question has to do with fiscal sponsorships, because we're seeing more and more the use of fiscal sponsorship agreements, either for the incubating opportunity they offer an emerging nonprofit, in part because of the wait times at the IRS for recognition, but also to Ben's point about, you know, an interest in really getting to the fun stuff, which I smiled, Ben, because I say that to my clients all the time when I'm talking about donor advised funds or, you know, fiscal sponsorships. You can do the heart of the work and not have to do the back office functions as much or the corporate realities. So my question is, are you seeing this? Are the panelists seeing more use of fiscal sponsor arrangements? And there's a difference between the short-term sort of incubating function while an organization waits and then moves out on its own, or the sort of captive fiscal sponsor arrangements where the community foundation stays in place. And I'm wondering whether you're seeing use of those tools as well.
I'm happy to start if that works, Julie and Ben, but yeah, so for everybody, I mean, I'll just back up and remind what is a fiscal sponsor. And what that typically means is, to her point, it's some group of people that might be coalescing around a cause or a project, and they haven't yet established their own 501c3 vehicle, their own nonprofit status. And so they're looking for a parent org, another organization, to be the parent and to be the umbrella, and hence the fiscal sponsor. And a community foundation is a great example of this. A lot of times a community foundation will serve as a fiscal sponsor for other types of causes as they sort of start up and shore up. We've got the Historical Society on here. You might see the Historical Society serve as an umbrella to some causes that are closely aligned in that vein. There are a couple value adds to fiscal sponsorships right now versus just jumping right in to establishing. And number one is it gives you a period of point of just testing the case, right? Testing the case study of, is this really a viable entity? Can it achieve critical mass to have assets under management, and so on and so forth? And then you have the issue of accountability that the fiscal sponsor can provide, which is really important and critical, because as donors are trying to make decisions about investing in a new idea, they want to know a little bit about the solidity, you know, how solidified is the entity? Can it really be sustained and exist? And so the backing of another fiscal sponsor gives it credibility. I think that's really important. Those are some of the key, you know, to your point, it takes forever to get IRS to approve. The other thing that I think is really interesting here is that COVID has proven that in many cases, there's just a lot of nonprofits out there. There's, you know, over 1.8 million nonprofits, and I think 100 years ago there was less than, you know, 100 of them. And so we have a lot of potential for duplication and frankly, just too many to try to keep them all afloat. And so we have competing priorities. And so the fiscal sponsorship sometimes creates avenues to slow down and analyze and assess other opportunities for strong mergers and acquisitions and other partnerships, back office support arrangements that might be more effective.
If I could just add also, with us, Community Foundation, if I have someone come in from Fitchburg and they want to start an animal rescue, and there's already 5 of them in Fitchburg, you know, I can guide them into how they can engage with these others, as opposed to starting, to Brad's point, you know, there's a lot of nonprofits and some of them are doing the same thing that the others are doing. So we get to help them in that way.
I think Brad and Linda, you know, covered everything really relevant. I'll just share one example that might be interesting. We were working with someone who set up a giving circle for the local community for next geners. And this was a side job, you know, not, you know, he has a totally different day job. And they used a fiscal sponsor, their local community foundation, because it allowed them to, you know, sort of run this program and bring in other next geners in the community to be a part of this giving circle, but to, you know, leverage the community foundation for all of the, you know, administrative needs and other back office support functions, so that they really, it could enable them to focus on the, you know, the programmatic aspect and kind of marketing and bringing people together. So I thought that was a really interesting example and sort of use of a fiscal sponsor.
I don't want to detract from other questions that are out there, but Julie brings me to mind that, you know, thinking of giving circles, now you're talking about the trends and sort of the landscape shift that is naturally occurring in philanthropy, and where it's easier now than ever to engage digitally and in new formats of how we give. And you know, there's a great collective, it's called philanthropytogether.org. It was a Gates funded endeavor that really brought together all the giving circles to try to kickstart, you know, a new era of giving. And there's a lot of free resources there. There's a lot of free trainings, and you know, they launched that effort in COVID, so they had to do it in a virtual environment, and it actually has proven very successful because it's a way to connect people across the country and in some places across the world to learn from one another. You know, I think that's the one caveat that Julie touched on earlier about donor advised funds is we don't know what regulations are going to come down the pike, but we know regulation is going to come. And the notion of anonymity that donor advised funds give, look, the value of anonymity is if you want to make a big gift to, you know, the expansion of the library and you don't really want that to be super public. Some people love their names on buildings, other people don't. And so the anonymity allows them to make a significant contribution to the library or any number of causes, and it not to be disclosed that it was, you know, Sally from the community. But the problem with anonymity is also that it creates some bad actor spaces where we might be contributing to causes that are a direct link to some of the white supremacy and some of the anti-immigrant that is putting violence on anti-immigrants or immigration, or putting violence towards LGBT, whatever it may be. The problem is it's funding hate, it's funding different types. And so there's a lot of scrutiny of sort of the anonymity of donor advised funds. And so the bottom line is this is where the Community Foundation plays a pretty critical role of keeping people like Ben and his family in good, you know, good operating standards, is because they're monitoring those types of activities. And the Community Foundation can help, just like a private foundation, if it has really good advisors, can help families make better decisions and not inadvertently give to a cause that puts them in a negative light or puts them in harm's way, and can think critically about the trends. But no matter how we look at it, donor advised funds are going to change because they're amassing significant wealth in their, and some people are worried. The truth is they're giving more money, they're churning more money than foundations historically could do, because it's not a sustainable model. And then that brings up the last point. there is an element of perpetuity that a community foundation offers, whether it's a donor advised fund or something else. And I think I just want to remind us that, we didn't get to where we are as communities without someone kind of planting those seeds well before and growing the trees that we have today. And the same is true with how we gift resources to the community that sometimes will live on well beyond our own means. The difference that Ben's family is making today will likely outlive his generation, and there will still be potential for resources to give back to the community in future ways.
That was great, Brad. Well, we promised you a hard close at 10, so I think it's time for us to sign off. I want to thank all of you for participating.
Steve?
Linda, go ahead. Sorry. Linda.
We just want to do a quick poll. If you can
Right.
figure out,
Yes.
just give us some ideas as to some of the programs you might want to see in the future that we can put together.
So take a look at that poll and take it as you're looking at the poll. I'll just thank our speakers, Julie and Brad and Ben. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise, and all of you for taking the time to be with us. There's obviously a lot more to cover here, so we're hoping you can give us some ideas about what you might want to see down the road. And if we can, we've recorded this event so we can get that out to folks who missed it, or if you want to catch something maybe you didn't catch in the conversation, we'll make that available to you. And as we say, the poll is open to get our ideas about what you'd like to see. So again, thank you all so much for being on board. Linda, thanks so much for making this possible, and our Professional Advisor Network Advisory Committee. And how are we doing with the poll?
We're doing good. It looks like how to have the philanthropic conversation with clients is taking the lead for sure.
Okay.
But anyways.
So Linda, it's up to you to sign
Everybody
this
should be
off.
able to see it. Now you can see the results.
Oh, there are your results. How cool.
Wow.
I love this.
So,
This is great.
how cool is that? Everyone, thank you so much. And again, I apologize for all the bumpiness in the beginning, but I really want to thank our panelists. You are awesome people, and you really have a lot to offer. So thank you again. And good to see everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Awesome.
Bye. Have a good weekend.